Also, like, for some reason, a lot of studies and therapists were always like, yoga, meditation, that's the thing that will help.
Mm.
That never helps me. And even to this day, when people recommend, I've like tried, at least every few months, I'll try yoga class. I cannot stand it. Focusing on my breathing makes my tics so much worse. And I'm not the first person with Tourette syndrome to feel that way. I've met so many people like that.
Welcome to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering children and adults through education, advocacy, and research by sharing the stories and experiences relevant to the TS community.
Hello and welcome back to The Uptick. I am here today with Emily Fleischman, who is a Mount Sinai West hospital nurse. She grew up in New Jersey and was involved with NJCTS in some of its earlier years. And this is an episode devoted to sharing Emily's story, growing up with TS, and her experiences with New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome, and tips and advice that she has that she's learned professionally as a nurse, as well as just in her own personal experience as someone with the condition. Emily, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for reaching out to me, Michael.
So excited to have you on The Uptick. Man, there's so much we could talk about. I've known you for years, since I think 2016. I think it was my first year at the academy when I was a coach. And I know you've also been involved with NJCTS for a while. Maybe we start at the beginning. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, your diagnosis, and how all of that began.
Yeah. So when I was 6 years old, I don't totally remember all of it. It's very much a blur. I was diagnosed with OCD and Tourette syndrome. My mom noticed some eye blinking, shoulder shrugging, and noises I would make. At first, she brought me to the pediatrician, and they had me go to a neurologist. They're like, she definitely has Tourette syndrome. The tics and OCD increased through my early childhood years. I had tics where I would have to say things where I would be like, I love you, mom. I love you, mom. I love you, mom. It was very, very
Oh my
bizarre,
gosh,
but like,
did we talk about this? Not to interrupt, but I had that exact same tick. I had an I love you tick that I said to my parents and my grandparents. Yeah, I
no,
absolutely had that as well.
I think it's also like the neuroscience degree in me also sort of wants to relate it to the OCD almost, because I had OCD where I would be like, if I don't touch this picture, then my brother's gonna die. That for some
Mm.
reason it was so textbook, my OCD. So I think it sort of went over to my Tourette's, in that's why I had the I love yous. And
Yeah.
I also want to touch on one more thing. I think it's important to touch on siblings.
Yes.
I think it was really hard for my brother, my Tourette's. He felt a lot of shame around it also. And there was a period of time where I was getting so much more attention from my parents because of my tics. Like, they were trying to figure out what is this new diagnosis. I had doctor's appointments like multiple times a week. And I think it was really hard for my brother, where he wasn't getting as much attention, and he also was very embarrassed about my tics. And like, we were just kids, like, we didn't know. And I like don't really have any advice on that, because I don't know what could have been done better. But I think it's just like a sidebar note that like parents need to remember, like,
Something to be
how this
mindful of. I'm
impacted.
so glad you brought that up, Emily, because that's something. I mean, I kind of saw this in my family of three siblings, and we each kind of had our own stuff, but two of the three also have tics. But it's very natural, I guess, for when you have a family with multiple kids and one of them has something like Tourette or a condition like that. It's natural for them to be getting more attention. They're the one being driven to doctor's appointments. The parents are working with them more kind of one-on-one and bringing in tutors or friends help, like whatever they need. And I think it's, that is the way it is. Like I actually asked this question to two psychologists. Do you know Jeremy Lichtman? Oh yeah, you definitely do. I asked him this question, and I actually had him and his dad on a podcast episode like a year ago, and one of our earlier ones, and I was asking them, like, what do you do in this situation? Like, how do you make that other kid in the family that doesn't have tics, how do you make them feel special too and not feel, and I was kind of coming at it from this idea of like, oh, you need to treat all your kids equally and give them all the same amount of time and make them all feel equally special. And they challenge that. They push back on that. We're like, no, like if one kid's got more that needs to be worked on, then they're going to get more time. And that is, it shouldn't be equal. It should be you meet each kid where they're at and give them the resources and time and attention they need. Now, what Jeremy's dad said that I really, this is, something that really stuck with me was, I guess Jeremy's sister, their dad decided to have like I think it was like a day a week, like an evening where they'd like go get ice cream, him and his daughter. And that was like his time to bond with her, like intentionally carving out some time. Not that they didn't see each other other times throughout the week, but just intentionally carving out that time that was between him and the non-Tourette kid to make sure that she felt valued and was developing a relationship with her father as well and all of that. And I thought that made a lot of sense. It was like, we're not saying that you have to treat your kids like equal amount of time and attention, but you're saying that you don't want them to feel neglected, and you do have to give them that acknowledgement and like do something that works for your family.
It was a big diagnosis. It like rocked the family. It's a big deal.
Yeah. It is. And it can change family dynamics. And, why is Emily eating breakfast not in the dining room? I don't know. How do you handle those things? That's all stuff that the family would talk about and handle it. But being the second or third to be diagnosed can also have its challenges. But I think, the first is tough because the family's still figuring it out and then explaining it. And then you find out like your younger sibling has tics too. But theirs are different. They have different co-occurring conditions. So you don't notice it at first. And I don't know, a lot of things that can happen, but great point though. Love that point about like how do we balance that? And it's really a matter of, I think, of just kind of meeting each kid where they're at and making sure that they each feel appreciated, not necessarily in the same way, but that they each feel appreciated.
Firstly, thank God for my mom. Like, I love her so much. I'm so happy to have her in my corner. I saw incredible doctors that changed my life. I learned great CBT techniques where how to control my OCD and Tourette's. I was medicated since a young age, and I was able to control, in a sense, my tics and my OCD in school, but I wouldn't learn anything in school. I would sit there and all day just not pay attention to the teacher, and I'd be like, don't say something, don't tick, don't have an OCD urge. I would get up to go to the bathroom multiple times an hour so I could flush the toilet and tick while the toilet was flushing so no one heard. There was so much shame around it. But then I would come home and I'd explode from holding tics in all day. I'd be a mess. And then I'd have tutors come and reteach me what I missed in school. It was just not an okay way to live, and it wasn't a way to possibly function as a human being. Then freshman year of high school, I decided I wanted to come clean. I was sick and tired of being ashamed of my tics. I was tired of not having a social life because I would cancel sleepovers or hanging out with friends because I didn't want anyone to know about it. I was like, I have Tourette's, I have OCD, I can't control it. It's a neurological condition. It's a disorder, a disease, just like diabetes. And I came clean. We even told teachers about it. I was sick of like math tests being taken away from me because I had such a bad erasing tic where I would not be able to complete it, and I wouldn't complete my tasks in time, and teachers would drag my paper away and there would be like pencil lines on it because I'd be like, just let me finish, please, please, please. So then I decided to get involved in the Tourette Syndrome Association freshman year. I was the New Jersey Youth Ambassador. It was in the very early years. I was so inspired by the Jennifer Zwilling. I saw a video on her. I'm like, she's so cool. She's so normal. Wait, like other people who are like cool and pretty and have a functioning life and go to college have Tourette's. And a lot of my shame went away.
Mm.
I went to DC and it was just so cool. I remember sitting in a circle with all of these other people with Tourette's. I'm like, wow, there's other people like me. My mom was just like moved to tears. She's like met other parents with people with Tourette's. And I learned how to do the youth ambassador education program for bringing it into schools and hospitals and universities. And then on day 3, we went to Congress and met with congressmen. And I actually spoke at the congressional lunch. I was the speaker about my story of Tourette's. And then I met Jen Zwilling, which was just the highlight of the trip, and her mom. And it changed my life. One of the biggest things was I was asked to speak at Yeshiva University School of Social Work. And I lectured about my story and Tourette syndrome, why you shouldn't bully people for it. I educated them about it. Then I got like super involved with NJCTS, which was just so cool. I wrote a book, a children's book about my, like, quote unquote, sort of my story. It's called Emily's Tic. It's available at Barnes & Nobles and Amazon and on Nook and on Kindle, which is so cool. Then
And you donate the proceeds to Tourette causes, I believe. I think
buy it because there's so few proceeds that I could like I haven't bought the book in years because maybe we need some better marketing, but buy it. We make whatever comes through the bank account each year. We make the donation. NJCTS had me interviewed on News 12 about Tourette's, 12 to Your Health. Just there was so much involvement in the Tourette Syndrome Association and NJCTS. It's at the pilot year of the Tim Howard Academy at Rutgers. NJCTS changed my life. It was just such a special experience. There's such special people I met.
you mentioned writing that book when you were, when was the book? Were you like in high school or so?
I was in high school. I think it was like sophomore year of high school.
What inspired you to write the book? Yeah, how did that come about?
You know, the youth ambassador presentation was really more targeted, I felt like, towards middle school, high school, maybe older elementary school. I needed to have a way to reach out to much younger children, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Those are years where you're like already developing stigmas, even at such a young age. And I felt that was a really great way to reach them. It was also a great way to reach people without a youth ambassador or youth advocate present. During that time, my family donated hundreds of copies to libraries all over the tri-state area, school libraries, so people could check out the book and get it and learn, because
Awesome.
there's very few books about Tourette syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And at that time, it just like, yeah, it felt like a whole different world. Like even saying you had Tourette's, like people just didn't know about it. They didn't know what it was, or if they did, it was, coprolalia is what came to mind. And it was just, we've made a lot of progress in kind of short amount of time.
We've made a huge progress. Just
Really
the world.
have.
People just understand more and are more empathetic. I don't know, even as kids, like people would make fun of kids for having glasses. It was just
Right? Or like asthma, like you use an inhaler and like the kids have to disclose that, like, and it's bizarre that, yeah. No, I'm really happy with how far we've come with all of that. There's still more work to be done on socially and like integration, but it's less now of like, hey, don't bully this guy because he's different. Like we've for the most part, I think, gotten past that in most cases, and it's a little deeper around like inclusivity and making our world accessible and, I don't know, more important stuff that needs to, changing society to make it better. But, so you are a nurse. Do you have a specialty, or you're kind of like a nursing generalist? Is there a population you work with the most?
So right now I work adult med. It's called adult med surge. It's basically the patients after they go through the ER and they're admitted to the hospital and have an extensive stay. I've rotated through many hospitals, and could be anywhere from someone who has a hip replacement and has to be hospitalized, someone in diabetic crisis, someone with lung problems. Most recently, the floor I'm on really gets a lot of people who are from the underserved community, and we get a lot of homeless people with psychological problems on my floor that have extensive stays because they have infections and can't care for themselves. And having like the neuroscience degree with my Tourette's experience. Also, side note, I used to be an ABA therapist. So all of this stuff, like with my diagnosis, empathy, I've totally fallen in love with working on this niche of a unit where I'm working with a lot of like the homeless population with mental health problems or special need. We get a lot of special needs people, special needs adults who don't have families and are just found on the street and need to be placed in a home for special needs individuals.
Have you found any or come across any Tourette patients in your work?
Actually, I did. And all of the people didn't understand and they thought it was schizophrenia. And I'm like, no, he has Tourette's. And it was just like so cool that I was able to educate the doctors.
That was my next question. Yeah, did you educate the medical staff on Tourette, given the hospitals you've been to?
Yeah, they wanted to send him to psych. And I was like, no, he has Tourette's. And I met this great psychiatrist at the hospital and we were like talking about my Tourette's. It's really cool. And it's awesome that I've been able to educate people about it. And
I'm sure they appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. What inspired you to become a nurse? Is it something you always wanted to do, or how did that come about?
I knew I wanted to do something healthcare related. My original degree is like the neuroscience degree, which allowed me to take all prereqs for medical school, pre-PhD, pre-PsyD therapist, pre-social work, pre-nursing. And I went into nursing because it allows me to use the science background and help people. But if I were a therapist, I think it would be really hard for me because it's nice to have coworkers to interact with. So I love that I'm helping patients, but I also have coworkers. I'm not just isolated one-on-one. And most importantly, I work 3 days a week. Full-time as a nurse is 3 days a week. 4 days to still enjoy my time outside of work. It's my like real niche. I think
that's amazing. In terms of just like for a lot of people, and like if you need to accommodate a certain lifestyle that you've got, or just like a life structure, if you're neurodivergent or any health condition or something, like I could see the 3 days of work being no, that's not to put it easily. Like those 3 days are grueling. Like I remember hearing from you, you're on your feet all the time and you're doing anything, going between floors and
everyone should consider being a nurse. There's so many things you could do. You could be a psych nurse, an ICU nurse, a school nurse. It's so good. Like if you want to have kids eventually, you can take time off and go back. You can work part-time, full-time. If I want to go on vacation, I can work, and I need extra cash, I can work overtime. I absolutely love being a nurse. I am so thankful this job came to me.
I will say also, Emily's really great at finding nursing opportunities. I know during the pandemic, you got on the nursing grind you were a crisis nurse during COVID.
Being full crisis.
Yeah, you had a great gig set up there during that. I shouldn't say great. It was a horrible time for the world and for healthcare professionals, but you were very employed and had no shortage of work and they paid you well for it. And you had mentioned about when during childhood you did CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. Did you do any work with CBIT as a kid, or was that not really a big thing then? Because like when I mean, we're about the same age and it wasn't that big or prominent for Tourette back then, but I'm curious if you got into CBIT at all.
I don't think it was around, but the key takeaways from the CBT I did, the cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm not so familiar with CBIT, but the key things I learned were focusing on like a thermometer, and eventually like a thermometer, the temperature will go down and your urge to tick will go down. And we used a lot of counting techniques, like counting how many times I ticked and to bring it to my awareness.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, let's talk a little more about that if you don't mind. Like how CBIT helped you, what kinds of things you guys did, what you learned. Do you mind sharing more on that?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing, so much of it was a blur, and I guess like maybe just the trauma of it also is, I don't remember so much, but I do remember that we used to get like a pitching counter like baseball pitchers had, and I had to like carry it around in my pocket all day because we didn't have cell phones. We're old, Michael. 29.
Oh, I know. I did. That's true. Kids have cell phones these days.
And I would count it in my pocket. Like every time I said, I love you, mommy. Because that was like my thing. I had to do it. And we would come up with goals. Like this week, we're going to do it less than 100 times today. Because I would say it 100 times a day.
But so was the goal to reduce the tic? Like you were trying to count how often you did it so that you could become aware of it and know when you're ticking.
Yeah, and reduce it. And then we had, I forget the name of it, but like they do this a lot with ABA therapy. Kids, like there was a reward measure in it. Which like, I don't know, your Tourette's is something you can't control. I don't know if you really want to fix it. Like there's nothing wrong with having Tourette's. I think I'm going to put it the right way, that it's nice that I'm no longer ashamed about my Tourette's. I used to have so much shame around it. Maybe it's just the society we grew up in, but it is nice that it is somewhat manageable with I guess like everyone wants it manageable in a sense. If you can't control it, there's nothing wrong with it. And like sometimes my tics are so bad, and it's not bad. My tics are so out of control and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm ticking. I've had patients ask me, they're like, are you coughing? Because I'm like making noise. But I noticed that like, as the day goes on, I have like verbal tics where I'm like, and then I'm like, no, I have Tourette's. But I guess it was nice that I learned some tools to have control over it. And I no longer think about controlling it. It just sort of decreased it. Also, just like I aged out of it, I guess.
That's some of it too. Yeah. I was going to ask about that. Did you find as you became an adult, like the tics got better? Did co-occurring conditions change at all? Like the OCD or anything?
Yeah, it got better as I got older, but there's still times where it's a struggle. I notice, just like they say in the Youth Ambassador program, when you're sick, tired, anxious, stressed. So definitely halfway through the workday, if I'm having a really hard work day, my tics are increased. When I'm sick, they're increased. During times of stress, they're increased. If my apartment's super messy and I need to get it in order, it's totally increased. Organization, I thrive on organization. And if it's not organized, I'm like, my tics are not okay.
You mentioned a little earlier you're certified in ABA therapy.
Trained. I used to work in college.
Trained in it. Yeah, applied behavior analysis. I think that's the first time that ABA therapy has been mentioned on my podcast. So would love if you don't mind to take some time and to kind of walk us through what it is and what you learned about it. I think that'd be interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, I did it so long ago. I hope I can give you an adequate definition. So it's used a lot for children with autism, but it could sort of be carried over into anything in everyday life. It's a lot of rewarding for behaviors. So it could start so simple as teaching a young child to answer to their name. So every time you call, and there's a lot of statistics used for it. So the trainer, the therapist sits there with a chart, and every time we could do 10 trials of saying, hey, Michael, and we want to see how many times you respond by looking at me. And every time it would start off, every time you responded, you would get an M&M or some sort of reward. So, hey, Michael, you respond and look at me. Then I give you an M&M and I mark it on the graph that you respond, and we'll do 10 trials. And it can carry over, and it has reinforcement too. So just teaching a child how to sit down, saying, sit in your seat, and then they don't listen. And you physically could like kindly put them in their seat, give them an M&M as a reward and say, good job sitting in your seat. And then we try it again 10 times. And I don't know, it's like sort of interesting how it's sort of the reward aspect was used on me also as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on conditioning, like the psychology on that learning can happen through reward and through like an incentive like that.
Rewarded as a 29-year-old.
We are. I mean, that's why we pay people. That's why we like in a job, money is motivating. That's why, people definitely respond behaviorally to rewards and incentives. So we use them. But yeah, I mean, ABA can be used. Like I think you described it really well as far as I know of it. And I've never had formal training in it, but my Google searches and like broad internet research. I mean, I know it's used a lot for communication, helping young kids with social skills and developing independence. But yeah, really like using the principles of learning, like operant conditioning to change behavior. And I think it underpins a lot of other kinds of therapy and just work that I think ABA is kind of like it's almost like a general like baseline, and a lot of those principles can be taken into CBIT or cognitive behavioral therapy or other areas. But no, great to hear about that. We have a lot of parents that listen to our podcast, and they're always looking for ways that, so for example, hearing that like getting ready in the morning took so long, and it did for me too. I remember I'd like get distracted by different things. I always would like, I played piano a little bit as a kid, and I would like go see the piano and like want to go tinker away at that for like 10 minutes. And then I like put my socks on, and I had the like thing where it just never felt right, and so putting on a pair of socks could take me like 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. And so I remember like my mom did something very simple, which is she just had me wake up a little bit earlier as a kid. Like maybe I'd wake up a half hour earlier or something, which can be tough if you need to get your sleep or you're staying up late and stuff. But that actually went a long way, just giving me more time so that it was okay if I wanted to tinker around on the piano a bit, or I wanted to, or had to like spend time putting on my socks because it just didn't feel right with some of the sensory issues I had. We accommodated it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, being a kid, if you can remember that far back, kind of what are some areas where it may be things your parents did well that you're like, yes, that is something other parents I recommend for other kids. Does anything come to mind?
Good question. Similarly, the extra time in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
We needed the extra time, and then I didn't feel like I was running late to school. I was able to get out all of those urges, because who wants to start the day with not getting out those urges?
Yeah, no, you're just gonna feel,
It's just gonna feel like uneven and weird.
You're gonna feel weird.
Definitely also just like identifying where I had to do tics. The kitchen was a really big stressor for some reason. The table, I always had to touch the table. So we would just try to avoid the kitchen in the morning. I just wouldn't go to the kitchen. We would eat breakfast outside.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's great. Just being adaptable to things like that. I think, there's no reason you have to eat in the kitchen. Like if it's triggering tics and you don't want to be ticking, then don't.
I think also it's like, this is something that even affects me today. Like, because right now I'm not trying to change anything about my tics. I'm happy where they are. Like, they're pretty decently controlled. I'm past that stage of making changes on it. As a kid, and when we were going through cognitive behavioral therapy, it was like part of my tasks. It was part of my assignments that it had to be brought to my attention to the tics. But that was incredibly stressful. And these days, my grandmother, I love her so much. She's my bestie, but she's 87 and she's just not going to get it. She always tells me when I'm ticking. I guess maybe it's communicating with your child or partner who has Tourette's, and do you want me to point out when you're ticking? Like, I know I'm ticking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's a way of like, almost reading their body. Yeah, communication's important, whatever they want, because it's going to be different for everybody. Some people, I would say there's something nice about like if they can read your body language and tell like, hey, they're ticking, they probably don't want me to remind them, or you say it in a way that doesn't remind them of the ticking. Like you could say something else about like, I don't know, it's their partner, be like, hey, do you want a back rub or something? Like, I feel like there's other ways to handle it that doesn't just draw attention to the tics, but it's so individualized, because even just mentioning anything about it when I'm ticking, it's just going to remind me that I have tics and it's going to trigger them. So it's like, sometimes you just don't say anything. Everyone's different on that.
Also, like, for some reason, a lot of studies and therapists were always like, yoga, meditation, that's the thing that will help. That never helps me. And even to this day, when people recommend, I've like tried, at least every few months, I'll try a yoga class. I cannot stand it. Focusing on my breathing makes my tics so much worse. And I'm not the first person with Tourette syndrome to feel that way. I've met so many people like that. So I don't know, just like, it's good to try everything. I love like listening to loud music. I guess it drowns out the tics. Some other tips I have, I really loved as a kid, and still to this day, massages, because just the movement of my tics would cause so much strain on my muscles. And that would be a way to help me relax. We tried everything. Another pro tip, I have great health insurance. My insurance covers medical massages.
Oh, so you can get that through?
Yeah, I do. I go
through Tourette. Wow,
it's
that's
not
amazing.
For Tourette's, it's for like chiropractic, but
okay.
I have back and muscle problems because I guess the tension from my tics. I do still like, when I'm exhausted, my tics are exacerbated.
Like, I don't know. I think being aware of your body and how you feel at the moment is important and can go a long way with like knowing your tics and how your Tourette affects you.
And
Um,
verbalizing it, like
mhm.
verbalizing things that are bothering you and upsetting you. Another recommendation for parents, I don't think I was really ever sat down and explained that I have Tourette's and the definition of why I was acting this way and the OCD. And it was really scary. I was like, why do I obsess over remembering the street numbers? I
Mm,
think it's sort of important to, like, for your child, not, my parents are great parents.
mhm.
They just didn't know. I think it's really important to talk about the diagnosis and why your brain acts this way, which also, I know the Tim Howard Academy does a really great job of talking about like why your brain does this, but
Mhm.
at a younger age, I think it's really important.
That's a great point. And I've heard from other guests on the podcast that there's different ways to frame that depending on how old they are. Like when the kid's really young, you can talk about it in terms of like habits and like how our brain forms habits and to keep doing certain things. And, there's different ways you can explain it and different words you can use that kind of make it make sense, as the person goes through life. But I think also understanding, yeah, like how the kid feels about it, because I could see that being kind of confusing. Like as a kid, like why do I have such a fixation over even numbers, or why do I remember street names or whatever, or have that kind of encyclopedic way of thinking? Why am I that way? Why does my brain do that?
It's so interesting.
No, we've had some good ideas here shared. Well, Emily, it's been awesome having you on the podcast here.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for having
so,
me.
so much. Great tips here. Love hearing your story. Love seeing you again. I'll have to meet up in person in the city soon here. Any other last minute kind of ideas, thoughts, tips? If someone walked up to you and said, "Hey, I just got diagnosed with Tourette's. Emily, what do I do? You've had it your whole life." What advice would you tell them?
I would tell them to go to the Tourette Syndrome Association and reach out. There's so many good, or NJCTS, there's so many good resources. They have a list of doctors, they have a list of therapists, they have a list of parents that could support you. There's just so many resources.
Absolutely. Don't be a stranger. Reach out to NJCTS, to other Tourette organizations. There's Facebook pages. There's all sorts of support and resources for, for parents, for the student, for the young adult with Tourette, for all, you name it. Make the most of it. And NJCTS is one of those. So feel free to reach out with questions. And we've got a dedicated staff that is happy to make a referral, give you a list of physicians, CBIT providers, things like that. But Emily, I appreciate again having you on the uptick and wish you the very best.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, you take care.
Thank you for listening to The Uptick, brought to you by the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, empowering you to stretch the boundaries to live your best life.